3, 2, 1, go. Roll the. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Strategy Show. I'm your host, Simon Severino. Today, we have the CEO of Sales Maven, and she has so much to give about sales, how to close more, and she has something special for us. Hello, everybody, Nikki Rausch.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So cool to have you here because sales is so important right now. And, they don't teach it in universities. So we need it. We badly need it. And we will uncover how to recognize buying signals, how to react on them, what to say, what to do, and how to handle no's, because no's are so important when we think sales. So great to have you here, Nikki. What are you currently creating?
What I am currently creating, let me think about this now, is I have a membership platform, and for my people who want to continue to hone their selling skills. And one of the things that we're working on right now is we are creating actually a whole new membership site and platform where all the training will be housed. So I'm really excited about it.
Cool. Who should go and check that out? Is it for small business, big businesses? Who is your ideal client?
It's really for my ideal client typically is an entrepreneur or somebody who's in a business setting that has a sales component to their job, that has like a target, or of course with an entrepreneur, you have to be selling, right? And doing all the other things too. So it's really for somebody who wants a community of people who are learning together to really hone those sales conversations.
Cool. So let's jump directly into the first CEO tip, how to recognize buying signals.
So a buying signal is a verbal or nonverbal cue that somebody gives that indicates that they're interested. And one of the most important things to do is act on a buying signal when you get it. So for instance, if you're having a conversation with somebody and they indicate some kind of interest, for instance, maybe they compliment you on what it is that you do, something about your business, something about you as how you're showing up in a conversation with somebody, it is a potential buying signal. And what you want to do is invite the person to whatever the next logical step is in that conversation. So oftentimes as a CEO, you might be in a conversation with somebody and they might be like, oh, it's so interesting what your business does. We're not really sure how we would use that, with what we do. Well, that's a potential buying signal right there. So what I want you to do is actually invite the person to the next step. So say to them, well, if that's something you're not quite sure how you might use it, would you be open to having a conversation? And can we go ahead and schedule that now? If you're in a setting where it doesn't make sense to actually have the conversation now, and then get out your calendar and schedule it. That's a potential buying signal. Or if somebody asks you something like, actually, I'm going to give a counter one because that one, the first one I gave, I think is maybe a little bit more obvious, but sometimes a less obvious buying signal is when somebody will bring up a negative experience that they've had with maybe the type of work that you do or the type of position that you're in. And that can even be a potential buying signal when somebody says, well, we hired a sales coach. They came in, we didn't really get anything out of it. Our team didn't really implement. That's a potential buying signal. I want you to actually act on that. I want you to check and see if there's something they might be open to having a conversation. So I would always say in those cases, I'm so sorry that you had that experience. When I come in and do a sales training, we really focus on X, Y, and Z. This is something that people do have results with. Is that something you'd be open to talking about more? So you have to invite and then make the next step really obvious, schedule it right then in the moment, or ask for to further the conversation right in the moment.
This is so powerful because some people might hear this as a critique and get defensive. And you see behind that, and you see the invitation for a conversation.
Yeah, and the answer could be no, right? And we'll talk about that too. But if you don't ask, the person might walk away and never really even realize that the reason they were bringing up this objection, the reason they were bringing up this negative experience is because they're looking for you to reassure them in some way about how the work that you do could be different, how it could offer something new to their team.
Yeah, there is an invitation there. And I also didn't hear it, but now that you say it, it might be there. So continue uncovering.
Yeah.
Beautiful. We now, before we go to how to react to these buying signals, move to our segment, which we call the Strategy Award. Strategy Award. Strategy Award. The Strategy Award is where you can pick one company that is doing things really differently, even awkwardly, like you just experienced, but you pick them because you think they are doing the right thing.
Oh my gosh, let me think about this one. The company that oh gosh, I have it in my head, and now I'm struggling to think of what the actual name of this company is. It's a company based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and they make burritos. And I just listened to a podcast. It's going to drive me crazy now that I can't think of the name of this.
You can just describe them, and later on we will put it in the show notes.
Okay, I'll get the name for you. But what they're doing really well is based on everything with the coronavirus. They've gotten really creative with their marketing. Like, one of the first things they did was come in and spend $20 on burritos and you get a roll of toilet paper. Well, and then, it was kind of a funny thing, and they did this really great marketing campaign around it. And then after that, they actually even opened a market for products like produce that would have gone bad as a restaurant owner, but it was a market that people could now come and buy these products. So it was a way to pivot their business. And I loved this. I heard about it on a podcast, and I actually know the podcaster who interviewed the guy from it. And I was like, oh, I just love that creative side of business, of being able to pivot quickly and do things that's being of service to a community that needs it right now.
Cool. Thank you. And let's go to the second CEO tip. So we know now that there are buying signals, even maybe where you don't notice them. So continue. And when there is a buying signal, how do we answer?
So when there's a buying signal, the most important thing is to issue that invitation. And I kind of talked about that a little bit. One of the mistakes that people often make is they'll say something like, hey, let me just send you some information. And then they leave it there. And if you're going to send information to somebody and you really want them to review it, and you think it's something that's going to help them in some way, you have to say, let me send some information over to you, and then let's schedule a time to chat about it so I can answer any additional questions that come up. And then maybe we can talk about next steps for us of working together. And then you get a time scheduled on their calendar. Because when you get a time scheduled on somebody's calendar, now you're making it really easy for them to work with you, because most of us, live and breathe our calendars. Like, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't even exist in my universe. So we want to be on somebody's calendar. We want to make it really easy. And so a counter to that, or a kind of another example of that too, is don't just hand somebody your business card and say, hey, call me sometime if you're ever interested. Like, most people I ask, like, how many of I do this when I go and speak, I'll ask in the room, how many of you have a stack of business cards sitting on your desk with the intent that I'm going to call that person someday? But then you never do because you're busy. So instead of giving somebody your business card, invite them to an appointment, get it on the calendar, and do it right then in the moment.
I'm thinking of creative ways to do it. I would send an email directly from my phone right now while I'm talking to them. Say, oh, yeah, sure. But then, and in this email, I would try to put some action for one of us.
Yeah.
So that I created some kind of bridge, but we have a clear action as a follow-up.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to make it super easy for people to take the next step with you. And the easier you make it, the more likely they are to take that next step.
Reacting to buying signals. Now, you have, and I resonate so strongly with that, a strong background in psychology, mainly uh, NLP. I have this book which I love so much, and we were just talking. It is Words That Change Minds by Rose Charvet. This is something that I regularly check upon when I think of how should I formulate this in this email, on the website, on some form of writing. What's your experience with NLP? How did you get there? What do you do with it?
So my background is in NLP is pretty extensive. So neuro-linguistic programming is what it stands for. And I have over 1,200 classroom hours. I'm master certified practitioner of it. And just to give some context to that, most people with a similar certification that I have less than 200 hours. So I really dug in to NLP, and what got me interested in it originally was this idea that people give you cues with their body language, with their voice, and being able to pick those up in sales felt like that would really give me kind of an edge in sales. And so I started studying neuro-linguistic programming in the early 2000s with this idea that it was going to help me in sales. And it certainly did. And it also improved my ability to be a better communicator. It allowed for the relationships in my life to improve because I was a better communicator. So I use NLP now in my work, and I teach a lot of NLP strategies and techniques in the sales process and conversation. And that's really why I focus on the sales conversation, is because of my background in neuro-linguistic programming. And the book that you had mentioned from Rausch Charvet, it actually comes from the language and behavioral profile of NLP. I mean, there are hundreds, maybe even more now, of processes in NLP, and the language and behavioral profile is like one process of NLP, but it's such a powerful one of being able to recognize people's motivational traits based on the way they answer questions. So I love that. I use it all the time.
Beautiful. And so one of that processes is that you ask questions in a specific way to find out if people are, for example, if they want to achieve something, or they want to avoid or get rid of something. Now, what I find difficult when I am thinking of, for example, the website, I could write, hey, come in, you can double your revenue in 90 days. Or, hey, come in, you can avoid all these boring meetings and processes that you have. And I never know, because I cannot do this circling interview. How do you do that?
Well, on the website and in your marketing type material, we don't know necessarily who our ideal candidate, what are their motivational traits, because it's context specific. So in some areas of your life, you might have it's called towards and away. So towards is like you want to achieve something, away is you want to avoid something. And so we don't always know what our ideal client's motivational traits are. So we have to do a mix of kind of this like towards type statements and away from statements. Now, I tend to be a real towards type person. That's like my strongest motivational trait, especially in work situations. Like the example, I don't think Rausch Charvet gives this example, but I've learned this. It's like some people will run their fastest to win a gold medal, and other people will run their fastest to get away from a German Shepherd. Like I'm the kind of person who will run my fastest to win a gold medal because I love to achieve things. And so if you're trying to attract a certain type of people, then you want to write your marketing, you want to have everything kind of geared towards them. But you want to be careful that you're not eliminating a certain type of person that might be a mix, right? So I tend to have more towards type statements in my marketing, but I have to always take a step back and put an away from at least one. If I have 5 bullet points, I have to have at least one away from type statement in there, because otherwise I'm eliminating a huge like portion of people who could benefit from the work that I do.
Absolutely. And I cannot recommend this book enough because it did improve the communication that we do with clients, but also it made me understand my friends, my wife, my kids better, because sometimes our conflicts are just because we have different communication patterns. And what she does really well is there is not a good and a bad pattern. There is not even a functional and dysfunctional one. There are just different way of processing information.
That's exactly it. And when you start to look at people, like, you're not making judgments about it's good or it's bad or it's right or it's wrong. Instead, you just start to notice what is the thing that drives this person. And this is how you get better in all your communication, but definitely in sales, is to recognize what somebody's kind of strategies are and the language that they speak. It's always like, if you can learn to speak somebody's language, they'll really connect with you. And they'll connect with you so deeply that they won't want to go find anybody else to work with, because they're like, you're my person, you get me, you speak my language.
We have an acceleration program where one big part is helping people get better at sales. And one thing that we see is that people, whatever their superpower is in sales, it's rigid. So if they are great at directly communicating, they will always do that in 3 words. If they are great at listening, they will listen for 40 minutes, and in the last minute they will come to the close. So whatever their superpower is, they tend to be stiff there, and we try to open up their repertoire so that they can be relaxed and flexible.
Yeah.
Now, that you have all these thousands of days of experience in it, how can somebody become more flexible, have more possible reactions in the sales conversation?
Well, first, I'm going to share with you my all-time favorite quote, which I think will speak to what you're saying here. It's called, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape." And that's exactly what I teach to in my sales strategies, is flexibility. So one of the ways to have more flexibility in a sales conversation is to stop focusing on what I need and what I want, and instead give your full attention to the other person. Pay attention to their language, pay attention to their facial expressions, pay attention to where are those places that they need time to process. Instead of just talk, sometimes you do have to take a step back and not even listen, but just allow for silence to happen so they can process information. So blessed are the flexible, because the more flexibility you have in a conversation, the more influence you have. So learning to add some strategies that, if you're like, I tend to be very, very direct, right? But if you're talking to somebody who isn't very, very direct, they're going to be put off by that. So pay attention to the other person, be willing to adjust your style a little bit. And just one little tip around this is, one of the ways to really make, it's almost like it's like at a really like subconscious level, to make an adjustment to your own style to allow for flexibility, is to pay attention to the person you're in conversation with. Pay attention to their rate of speech. If there's somebody who has a slower rate of speech and you talk really, really fast, you got a lot to say, sometimes you don't even take a breath between sentences, be willing to slow down a little bit. Or if you're on the other side, if you tend to be a little bit of a slower talker, then if you're talking to somebody who talks really fast, be willing to speed up. And again, back to what you said, there's no right or wrong. You're perfect the way you are, and so is your client. Be willing to adjust to their style, and you'll find that very quickly they'll start to adjust to you as well. And then we start to make this connection.
You are perfect the way you are, and so is your client. This is a jewel. And one thing that I'm really thinking about. So in the old world, when you say nonverbal cues, in the old world, I would see that person in a room. I would see their body. I would see how they sit, if they incline towards me or they go back. We would work with video, etc. Now our clients have 99.9% of their sales conversation in Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And where we just see this part, like right now. What do you observe, which cues do you look for when you just see this part?
Well, one of the cues that you look for is what's going on with their eyes. Like, are they somebody who, well, one, it's a little bit harder on Zoom because sometimes people want to look at like like I'm looking at you right now, but my camera's up here. And
Exactly.
if I want to really connect with you, I have to be able to look into the camera, but also be paying attention out of my peripheral vision as to anything that you're doing. Like right now, I can see you're doing a little bit of a head nod, but I'm actually not looking right at you on my camera. I'm looking at the camera to make that connection with you, and I'm paying attention to your body language. So if you did something like, I have to stop talking because that means you're ready to talk. Right? So pay attention to those cues that people give. If they take a big breath, stop talking. Either because they're going to talk or because they're processing and they need time to think. And if you just keep talking, you're talking through their processing time.
Beautiful. Also, let's talk about the silence, the awkward silence in the sales conversation. How long should it be? I remember myself training to shut up, and I had written it in my sales script. Now you shut up, Simon. Up to 17 seconds. I wrote to help myself. What about this? Is this still something that you teach that should be done?
Yes, I always say there are three areas where you really do have to be willing to be quiet and wait. And I always say zip it. So you say shut up, but I always say like zip it, right? And like put your lips together and just pause. So one time to be silent and wait is when you've issued an invitation for whatever that next step is. You have to wait until the person responds in some way. When the client has voiced an objection in some way and you've answered the objection and then you've issued another invitation, that's another time to just be quiet and wait. And then when you've issued close language, that's the third time that you want to be quiet and wait and let the client respond. It's okay. Whatever they say, it doesn't really matter, but we have to give them the opportunity to say it.
Absolutely. When should people start informing about the price? Because there are different philosophies there. The one, no, you go back to benefits, then the contrast, the opportunity, and then at the very end price. Because many people say straight away, hey, what's the price? How should we react?
So when somebody says straight away, what's the price? I teach and have always, and this is how I learned it too, is that you give the price as soon as the client asks for it. If you do anything other than give the price, it sounds like you're trying to, it sounds like you're trying to sell them or convince them of something. Now, just because you give price doesn't mean that's all you can give. So if somebody says, Nikki, how much is it to work with you? I'm probably going to give a range unless they ask a very specific question like, how much is it to be in your Sales Maven Society? I'm going to give the price. I'm going to tell them a little bit about it. I'm going to issue an invitation and then I'm going to wait. So as soon as somebody asks price, you give it. I will say on my consultation calls, I don't bring up price until the client does or until the end of the meeting. But as soon as they bring it up, I address it. I don't say like, we'll get to that later. Anytime a salesperson says that, when I ask about price and they go like, well, we're not there yet. We have to talk about these other things. I go, can't trust them. Moving on. Not going to buy from that person.
You're not talking to me. You're talking to your script.
That's right. Yes. I love that.
Beautiful. Before we go to the third CEO tip, how to handle a no, because there will be a lot of no's. Let's go into books. What are one or two books that you find currently inspiring?
Well, let's see, one or two books. One of the books that I really love is Uncopyable by Steve Miller. Do you know that book?
No, first time.
He talks about stealing genius in there, and it's so good. I love that book so much. So that's a favorite book of mine. Another book, because we talked about some NLP books, I'm going to say my first NLP, the first book that really made me fall in love with NLP is called My Voice Will Go With You by Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson is one of the, he's what they kind of started NLP and based it a lot on his work and 2 other people, but his work is so brilliant. And that book was like, wow, I was so blown away by that book, My Voice Will Go With You.
This is so beautiful because these are the 2, you are the first guest that has 2 books that nobody else said.
Okay, yay me.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I remember Milton Erickson, his seminars. So I remember the videos of him, and I was studying with scholars of him. He's such an impressive teacher.
Yeah.
What about Milton Erickson and his way of working did change something in you?
Well, I remember there was a story about, he was I think they call him I want to say they call him the godfather of hypnotherapy. Or the father of hypnotherapy, right?
He is.
Maybe not godfather, but the father. So I remember there's a story, I think it's actually in this book, but I could have read it somewhere else because I really dove into him a little bit. And he was talking about that there was a patient who had seen all these other therapists and wasn't getting any kind of results because when the patient would come into the room, they would pace around the room really quickly. And therapists couldn't get the patient to sit down so that they could, go through their normal therapy practice. And Milton Erickson, being so brilliant, when the patient came in to see him, the patient started pacing. And instead of asking the patient to stop what they were doing, he said, "A little faster now. Go ahead and go a little faster now." And he just encouraged their behavior. And he was patient and he waited. So this is back to an NLP strategy known as pacing, that it's super important that instead of just showing up in a conversation and being like, "Hey, this is the way I like to be communicated with, so you need to sit down, or you need to do this, or you need to do that." No, instead you have to pace the other person first. You have to match them where they are. And eventually the patient got so tired of walking so fast that they sat down, and then therapy could begin. Right. And so you have to pace before you try to lead other people. And it was a game changer for me. It still is to this day, this idea of that it's not my job to go in and tell people like, "Hey, this is me. This is how I show up in a room. And if you don't adjust to me, like, you're wrong." It's like, no, I'm going to show up in a room. I'm going to pay attention to you. I'm going to adjust to you. And then as soon as you feel comfortable, then I can ask you to make some changes.
Beautiful. Yeah, you remind me that Milton Erickson was one of these teachers who it's a typical situation for him to start that everybody else has tried but nothing works, and now comes Milton Erickson. In his books are full of this. This is beautiful. And then later also Steve DeShazer and Otto Kernberg would use many of his techniques and interventions. But it's a historic moment, Milton Erickson, in the history of interventions. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, we move to the third CEO tip: how to handle no.
Well, the fact of the matter is you're going to be told no, right? Like I've been in sales for 25 years and I always say like I've been told many times, but what I don't ever do is I don't ever act offended when somebody says no. If anything, I get really curious because if we've had really great conversation, if I suspect that there's some way that I can help this person, but they're not ready yet, my brain, when somebody tells me no, my brain always says not yet. Because people have what's known as a convincer strategy. Everybody has one. It's context specific. So in some areas of your life, your convincer strategy may be really low and it's easy for you to make a decision. But other areas of your life or areas of your work, you might have a convincer strategy where you have to hear about something multiple times. You have to have an invitation issued to you multiple times before you're ready to move forward. So when somebody says no to me, my brain says not yet. And now I don't say that to them, but what I would say to them is, if and when something changes, please know that I would be happy to work with you. So you're welcome to reach out to me at any point, because I'm always going to leave that door open, because at some point, if I do my job right, I'm going to find my way back in front of this person, and I'm going to hit their convincer strategy, and I'm going to be there ready with an invitation when they're ready to say yes.
I remember I used to really dislike the no's when I started out, because I was used at farming, and then when I built my first own company, then I had to do the hunting sales, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it before, because then you hear for the first time no,
Yeah.
and it is easy to feel defensive, offended.
Mhm.
So my tactic was, okay, Simon, today you don't call people to hear yes. You call 10 people with the goal to get 9 no's. And you don't stop working when you have that one yes. You stop working when you have 9 no's. And that's where I started to embrace this concept of no, and then it became a little bit more playful. What's your tactic? How you help people? Yeah, handling.
I love that your goal was to get to 9 no's. And the thing about this, I think, is super empowering as a CEO, as a business owner, is to recognize that not everybody is a client. And as a matter of fact, we have to repel a certain number of people away from us so that we have time and space to really attract our ideal client. So I feel like you, with your strategy of 9 no's, that's a way to repel people away, right? To say, I'm just going to get to my 9 no's, because I know that that's meaning there's some yeses in there too coming. And it leaves time and space for you to focus on the people who really want you right now, who are going to pay you the money or buy the product, whatever it is. So the other thing too is, oftentimes in sales, we attribute a no as a rejection. And it isn't. I would say, like, imagine that you went out and had a really beautiful meal at a restaurant, and it was just like every bite was so delicious. And then at the end of the meal, the waiter comes by and says, can I offer you the dessert menu? And you say, oh no, I couldn't possibly. I'm so full, but I loved my meal so much. They don't go back, behind the counter to all their colleagues and be like, can you believe that guy? I offered him dessert and he rejected me, right? It's like, it's just not the right time. They're not the right place, or maybe, the person's not ready, and that's okay. So you cannot say a no is rejection, because it isn't. It's just a no for them in the moment, unless they come back and say, I would never buy from you because you were a horrible salesperson. You dropped the ball here and you dropped the ball there. Well, that's different. But just somebody saying, like, nope, this isn't for me. No, thank you. It's not personal. It's not rejection. It's move on. Focus on the people that are ready and willing to pay you money.
This is a beautiful picture. I will remind myself of this picture sometimes, of the waiter with the dessert. Of course, yes, you wouldn't be personally offended by that. Beautiful. There is also this. I think it is in the Buddhist tradition, where when somebody says something offending to you, you picture an empty boat that is going down a river, and this empty boat with nobody in it, it hits you. You would never get mad at that boat. But if there is a person there, you say, revenge. But if there is nobody in it, you don't get mad. Why? What's the difference? And so this attribution that we do, and I like this picture, because sometimes, it happens in business. When you have visibility, when you have a big business, it happens that people hate you and attack you. But I try to picture this empty boat, because it reminds me that everybody, they have their journey, they have their situation, and you don't know it. So you cannot get mad right now, because you don't know where they are in life, if they lost somebody very dear, or if they're struggling. Usually they are, if they attack you. So go back to be kind, because you don't know what's going on. You really don't know.
Yeah. I say the same thing too when you have an appointment with a prospective client and you show up to the Zoom call and they don't show up. Sometimes people get offended, right? They're like, how dare this person blow me off? I teach this too to my clients. I
Mm.
say, reach out to that person from a place of care, check in and make sure they're okay. And I can't tell you how many times I've done this where the person has said, I just had this happen last year where the person said, I'm so sorry I missed the appointment, Nikki. I just got in a car accident. Well, good thing I didn't like reach out and be like, how dare you miss the appointment? You know, it's like people have things going on in their life. We never know what's going on. So your idea of like, be kind, reach out with care to people and they'll appreciate you for it. Even if they did blow you off, there's some part of them that'll be like, ugh, I kind of feel bad now that I blew this person off, when they're being so caring and kind about it.
Absolutely. I also encountered this in our internal meeting. We had people coming late to the meeting. And we have a culture which is very, very on point. We call it agora principle. We start on point, we end on point, and whoever is here decides, and everybody has to accept it. So because whoever is here is the right person in the room.
Yeah.
So we start on point, and it happens that when it happened for the third or fourth time, I don't like it. So usually I would go and send them an email. Hey, we missed you in that meeting. And it wasn't from a kind place. I was angry. So what I do now is whenever I see that the weak signal that I'm angry, I remind myself, hey, wait a moment, you don't know anything. So before you put something in there, kind. So I hope you are doing well because we missed you in that meeting. And really try to give space for all the possibilities that happen. And that has changed also how I approach people, friends on the street, if they're late, etc. It's a huge difference. And in these times, where we have to really care for each other, and we need more supportive stuff
Yeah.
in all this business and competition, etc. Yeah, but it's really about being human in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much.
One question. I'm thinking about how to end a conversation in a positive way, in a good way. You have a conversation, and if you're trying to close a deal, sometimes, it gets narrow, yes or no, okay, bro. But, and then next step, follow up, calendar. How can we do it to make it a positive, great ending?
One thing I love to use as a close to a meeting is I always say, now in just the last few seconds of our time together here, is there anything I haven't covered yet that would be useful or helpful for you in some way? Because if you start from that place, oftentimes somebody will say no, we've got it covered. Or maybe they'll say, we never talked about X, Y, and Z. And you need to know that in order to earn their business. But if they say, no, we're good, it's a really graceful way to just close the conversation. And so that's my tip around it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Is there anything I forgot to ask you?
Let's see. Can I offer a download for your audience?
Please, you have brought with us something special. What is it?
I have an ebook called Closing the Sale, and it gives you some steps on how to build confidence through that closed conversation. So your audience can get this for free by going to yoursalesmaven.com / sprint, right? /sprint. yoursalesmaven.com /sprint.
yoursalesmaven.com /sprint. And we will also put it in the show notes. Thank you so much, Nikki. My last question, should be my next guest?
I'm going to actually recommend Angie Trueblood. Do you know Angie? She has a podcast called Go Pitch Yourself, and she teaches people the importance of being pitched to podcasts and doing it in a really authentic way. Angie is brilliant, and I think being on a podcast is such a great way to get your message out into the world and to be exposed to a new audience. So that would be my suggestion, is teaching people how to get their message out into the world and doing it in a really authentic, beautiful way for the podcaster who gets pitched all the time.
Beautiful. And I think it is such a great way to build PR right now. And you can do it with low cost. And you can start by first approaching the small podcasters and the young podcasts, and then going to the bigger ones, and then going bigger and bigger. Because so you can practice, you get better and better and better, and when you get to the big stage, it can really be overwhelming, and you have just a couple minutes, and you really have to deliver. So it's not good for everybody to be on Oprah Winfrey's show for your fifth interview, right? That's really scary.
Yeah.
And so you can build it up bit by bit, and and go through all that stages of learning. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nikki. Come back soon.